So this season of Pentecost, which, as you probably remember and know, is very long, started in May and goes until right before All Saints' Day. So the last Sunday of the season of Pentecost is called Christ the King Sunday, and it is not until November. So we spend these next many months in what's called ordinary time, just that there aren't big church celebrations during this season, and we spend the month of it's green, right? The most of the church year is green, so we are now in this green season. But this season after Pentecost is full of stories about how to be disciples. The disciples learning how to be disciples from Jesus. It's Paul figuring out through all of his travels and travails and imprisonments and letters what it looks like for him to be a disciple. And thank you, Pete, for that wonderful explanation of what Paul's purpose was. And this lesson this morning reminds us that despite all of those other voices, despite all of those other things that can take our attention, the things that our spirit wants to do, but that it's hard for us to actually follow through with, that we can find rest and comfort in Jesus. We can find rest and comfort in the words of Jesus. So Paul acknowledges that it's hard to do the right thing all the time. Right? He says that. He says, I want to do the right thing, but I can't. Sometimes my spirit is in a different place than my body or my mind, and I can't get them to match up. And what I want to do isn't what I do. And what I want to think isn't what I think. And Jesus also understands this. So remember that despite the order of the way we read our lessons on Sunday mornings, the Gospels came first, right? The stories in the Gospels were around to some degree when Paul was doing his ministry. So he knew about the work of Jesus. So he probably would have had some version, or maybe a little understanding of what Jesus is getting at in Matthew. But he's basically saying again that it's hard to understand what to do all of the time, right? John came, John wasn't good enough. Jesus came, Jesus isn't good enough. And we have to figure out like who is good enough. And Jesus is here to say, I am good enough. I come from my Father. My Father is good enough. But he's going to spend his 3 years of ministry convincing people of that. So Jesus is helping us remember who to follow and how to follow. So he finishes this lesson and reminds us again that oftentimes it's the little ones in our midst, the kids, the young people who get it way quicker than the adults do. So he finishes with these, we call them the comforting words. Come to me, all that are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. They're comforting. It feels like there's something there that you can cling to. The Message translation sounds like this. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. So Jesus is reminding those people who are listening, his disciples, reminding us that it's inevitable that we are yoked to something, right? It's inevitable that we are bound to something or someone or some situation. And in Jesus' day, this image of the yoke, of a crossbar being placed over to oxen or towing animals, would have been something that was familiar for them. Probably not as familiar for us. But if you think about what a yoke does, it distributes the weight, right? It keeps it so that one animal isn't working harder than the other. But it also helps younger, less experienced animals learn from their experienced pair, their experienced mate. So when Jesus talks about being yoked with him, he's inviting us into this relationship, this pairing, where that we don't have to bear it all on our own. That what will be placed upon us, that the burdens that we will inevitably bear, we'll be able to work through them with Jesus' help. And people are yoked to things also, right? We're yoked to things that we can't avoid being yoked to. Someone reminded me this week, we're yoked to like the power grid, right? Like you can't live in this world without being yoked to the power grid, and all sorts of other things, right? Laws and all sorts of stuff like that. But similarly to what Paul is getting at, we're also yoked to things that we don't want to be yoked to. Maybe we're yoked to worldly passions or desires, or a tendency to make things harder than they need to be, or to overthink, or to spend time doing things that we wish we didn't have to spend time doing. There's things that draw us away from God and away from community and away from those we love, away from those things we really want to spend time doing. But then we're also yoked to things that make our lives better, right? We're yoked to this community. We're yoked to our families. We're yoked to people who do things for us, who help make our lives a little bit easier. Perhaps you're yoked to like a hobby or a passion, something that really does bring you life. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Jesus is reminding us that we can choose what things we're yoked by. So when we yoke ourselves to Jesus, when we decide, you know what, I will pair up with Jesus because he says he will share our burdens and he will remind us to rest. Now, I have heard in this congregation many times in the last 2 years, I can't say no. If you're guilty of that, you don't have to raise your hand. But I think probably all of us in this room are guilty of saying at some point to somebody else here, I couldn't say no, right? I am trying to be very intentional this summer about taking rest, about taking Sabbath. Diane's laughing at me. Because it's really important, right? And I'm not very good at it. So this is a reminder for me, and I hope it's a reminder for you, that it's okay to rest. It's okay to lay aside some of those burdens and to say, I'm not dealing with that right now. I'm just going to let that be. I'm going to give it up to God, and God will take care of it for me, or lay it back when I'm ready. And when Jesus says that his yoke is easy, it really means good, right? It's good to be paired with Jesus. That we're being paired with something that's loving and patient and full of grace. Because goodness knows that as much time as I try to rest, I'm still not very good at resting. But I'm given the opportunities over and over again to try, right? So when we start listening to this voice that is reminding us to rest, this comes at a very opportune time in the summer, we are invited to come, and we are invited to sit and to be, not do, but to be, and to put aside the other things for a little while. Because the burdens are unavoidable. The schedules fill up, right? That's not something we can really stop. So how it is to be a person in the world of today. But this is a reminder for us that we have this path. We have this welcome into a place of non-anxiousness, where we can lay aside the anxieties and the uncertainties and the burdens for just a little while so that we really can rest. So that we can share this lighter load and not be so burdened by whatever it is. So as Paul says, thanks be to God for this God who is full of grace, who teaches us over and over and offers opportunities over and over to say, and to respond when he says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden." And it's a good time to practice this now, because it's a little easier to do in the summer, right? If we were preaching this at Christmas time, you'd all look at me like I was nuts. But we can do it. We can try, because if we try now, then in 3 months when it's super busy again, we can say, you know what? I liked how that felt, and I'm going to take advantage. I'm going to try to be more intentional about it now too. So on this Sunday in July, I invite you to rest. Now, several of us have places that we're off to where we can go and rest. If you don't have something like that planned, plan something. Just take a day or a weekend. You're permitted to be not in church, it's okay. Because we need that, right? Life is hard, the world is hard. So let Jesus say to you, come and lay your burdens on me.